It was almost dusk when Tessa heard the knock, sharp and urgent, like someone too young to know how to wait. She'd just gotten home from her shift at the clinic and hadn't even taken her coat off. The hallway light flickered above the door as she approached, already annoyed, already tired. But when she opened it, her breath caught. Standing there, thin and pale, was a girl no older than 10, with wide eyes and a nervous grip on a thick yellow envelope. Her jeans were too short, her sweatshirt oversized, and her shoes were muddy as if she'd walked a long way. Tessa blinked, expecting her to ask for money or food or maybe directions. But instead the girl looked straight up and said, "You're my mom." The words didn't compute, not at first. They hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire that hadn't started yet. Tessa frowned. "What did you say?" The girl didn't flinch. She simply held out the envelope with both hands. "My name's Marley. I've got papers." Her voice was calm, practiced, almost rehearsed. Tessa didn't move. She couldn't. 100 things surged in her head. Old choices, buried memories, names she hadn't said aloud in years. "I think you have the wrong person," she said finally, her voice flat. "No," Marley said. "You're Tessa Jameson. My file says you signed the relinquishment papers when I was born. I wasn't supposed to find you, but my foster mom died last month, and I looked you up." Tessa felt the walls close in. She hadn't heard her full name spoken like that in years. Not since she'd moved across the state. Not since she'd buried that part of her life behind long hours, coffee, and silence. "Where are you staying?" she asked automatically, reaching for the envelope like it might confirm a dream or a lie. "No one now," the girl said. "I've been staying at shelters, but they keep moving people around. I just wanted to see if you were real." The wind picked up behind her, and Tessa noticed Marley's lips were slightly blue, her backpack torn at the zipper. She was trembling, though she tried to look composed. Tessa glanced at the file in her hands, then back at the girl, her chin, her ears, the tilt of her mouth. She didn't want to see it, but she did. The resemblance. The possibility. "Come in," she said quietly, stepping aside. Marley nodded once, like she already knew that would happen, and walked past her into the narrow living room, where the heater clicked on with a groan, and the truth waited on the table between them. Tessa sat across from her, heart thudding, hands unsteady as she opened the envelope. Inside were copies of her own handwriting from a decade ago, forms signed under duress and shame, a hospital record with her name on it. There was even a birth certificate, sealed once, now unsealed, and an old, creased photo of a newborn with a tiny ID tag around her ankle. Marley didn't speak. She sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, like someone who'd practiced this moment in her head too many times to say it wrong now. Tessa didn't know what to say. She stared at the pages until they blurred. "Why now?" she finally asked. "Why me?" Marley shrugged, then looked down at her hands. "You're all I have left. The last foster home was not good. I'm tired of strangers." Her voice cracked a little, and Tessa's throat tightened. "How did you even find me?" "Public records. The library. Some people helped." That scared Tessa more than she let on. If a 10-year-old girl could find her this easily, what else from her past could come walking through that door? Still, she couldn't look at Marley and see a threat, only a question she'd tried not to ask for too long. "You hungry?" she asked, standing abruptly. "I have soup. Sandwiches, maybe." "I'm okay," Marley said softly, but her eyes flicked toward the kitchen like hope and hunger were old friends she tried not to call by name. Tessa nodded and moved toward the stove. Her hands moved on instinct, open, pour, heat, while her mind stayed stuck 10 years behind, on the night she left the clinic with empty arms and a deeper emptiness inside her chest. She had promised herself she'd never look back, but looking back had found her first. When she returned to the living room, Marley had taken off her shoes and curled up under the old gray blanket on the couch. She looked small. Too small to carry this kind of truth. Tessa placed a warm bowl on the coffee table and sat beside her. "You can stay tonight," she said. "Just one night." Marley didn't nod, didn't say thank you. She just reached for the spoon and ate slowly, each bite like a fragile negotiation. Outside, the last light faded from the sky. Inside, two strangers shared soup and silence, neither ready to ask what came next. Tessa didn't sleep. She lay on the couch long after Marley had fallen into a light, twitchy sleep in the guest room, the one that hadn't seen a guest in years. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside made her jolt. Her mind spun through memories she'd locked away so tightly she barely recognized them now. She had been 20 when she gave birth, broke, alone, barely surviving on 2 jobs and a college loan she knew she'd never repay. Her boyfriend had vanished the moment she told him she was pregnant. Her parents, already long estranged, didn't pick up the phone. The clinic counselor had spoken gently but firmly. Closed adoption meant closure. That's what she'd chosen. That's what she'd clung to when the guilt tried to eat her alive. But now here that choice was, eating cold soup in the next room. At sunrise, Tessa made coffee with shaking hands, unsure if she should knock on the guest room door or pretend this had all been a strange, aching dream. Before she could decide, Marley walked in barefoot, hair tangled, eyes red-rimmed but alert. She didn't say good morning. She sat at the table like they'd done this every day. "Can I go to school today?" she asked, plain and direct. Tessa stared. "School? There's one a few blocks from here. I looked it up. I know I'm not registered, but I have my records. I just want to feel normal." That word, normal, hit Tessa like a slap. "You can't just walk in. There's a process, paperwork, guardianship." "Then pretend," Marley said. "Just for today, please." The desperation in her voice didn't sound childish. It sounded human. Real. Tessa hesitated, then sighed. "Eat something first." Marley nodded and pulled a banana from the bowl on the counter like she'd lived there her whole life. While she ate, Tessa reviewed the files again. There was nothing to suggest fraud, no signs of a scam. Just a girl who had lost too many homes and now stood on her porch asking for one more. She called the school, said she was the girl's aunt. The receptionist didn't ask questions. By 8:30, Marley was standing in front of Jefferson Elementary with her frayed backpack and hopeful eyes, and Tessa was left staring at the sidewalk like a woman who had just handed her heart to a stranger. The house was too quiet. The heater made clicking sounds. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope again, tracing the signature that had once come so easily, so quickly, because it meant survival. Now it looked like a betrayal. She picked up the phone twice to call someone, anyone. But who would she tell? "Hey, remember that baby I gave up? She's here now, on my couch. Wants to go to school." Number. That wasn't something people shared. Around noon, she drove to the school and waited in her car, watching the children spill into the yard for recess. It took her a moment to spot Marley, knees bent, laughing, arms outstretched as she chased a ball across the playground like she'd been there all year. No hesitation, no shame. Tessa didn't know whether to cry or turn away. Instead, she opened the glove compartment and took out an old mint tin. Inside were a few faded photos, folded so many times the corners had rubbed off. One was of her as a teen, pregnant, expression guarded. Another was of a hospital bracelet. No baby photos. She'd never been given any. No one told her if the baby was healthy, or if she cried, or if she'd been held. It had been too painful to ask. Now that baby was playing kickball, with scraped knees and brave eyes and a voice strong enough to knock on a stranger's door. Tessa took a breath and got out of the car. She walked across the yard, ignoring the looks from teachers and kids, and stopped near the bench where Marley was now sipping water. When Marley looked up and saw her, her face didn't light up. It just softened, like she'd expected this. "You came back," she said. "I wanted to see if you were okay." "I'm fine," Marley said, shrugging. "I always am. That's what I tell myself." That wasn't what Tessa expected. "You shouldn't have to tell yourself that," she said. "Well, I do." Marley stood and brushed crumbs off her pants. "Are you going to take me back to a shelter now?" Tessa didn't answer right away. The thought had been there, whispering. Safer. Cleaner. Easier. But nothing about this would ever be easy again. "No," she said quietly. "Not today." Marley looked at her for a long second. Then, just before the bell rang, she said, "I think I remember your eyes. I was a baby, but maybe I remember." Tessa's voice caught. "Maybe I remember yours too." They walked back to the car in silence, the playground behind them erupting in noise. But inside the car, it felt like the world had slowed down. Two people who shared blood and brokenness trying to figure out what that meant and where to begin again. By the time they got home from the school, the sun had climbed high and spilled gold across the front porch. Marley kicked off her shoes without being told and headed straight to the living room, curling up in the same spot as the night before, with a book she'd pulled from the dusty shelf. She didn't ask for food. She didn't ask questions. She acted like this was all temporary, and maybe it was. Tessa stood by the kitchen sink, pretending to rinse out the coffee pot while watching the girl from a distance, unsure of everything. How to act, what to say, whether to be warm or reserved. Her stomach churned with 1,000 feelings that had no names. Was she this girl's mother now? Or just a soft landing between more hard places? That question still hung in the air when the doorbell rang. Tessa stiffened. It was early afternoon. Too early for deliveries, and she wasn't expecting anyone. Marley looked up but didn't move. Tessa slowly opened the door and froze. A woman stood there in dark slacks and a tan coat, holding a manila folder against her chest. "Tessa Jameson?" the woman asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes?" "I'm Angela Ferris, Child Welfare Services. May I come in?" Tessa's blood turned cold. She opened the door wider without speaking. Angela stepped inside, her heels clicking gently on the hardwood floor. Her eyes swept the room quickly and landed on Marley, who sat motionless but alert, like a wild thing ready to run. "You've been located," Angela said to Marley in a softer voice. "We've been looking for you since your foster mother passed." Marley didn't reply. She clutched the book tighter, like it offered more protection than anyone ever had. "I was going to call," Tessa said, her voice tight. "I needed time to understand what was happening." Angela nodded as if she understood, but her professionalism remained locked in place. "Understandable. But when a minor is unsupervised or outside of the system, it's considered urgent, especially when they contact a biological parent." "She found me," Tessa said. "I didn't reach out." "Still, we have protocols," Angela said. She opened the folder and pulled out a few pages. "We need to verify custody status, assess safety, and determine next steps. Marley has been in and out of foster homes for years. Most of them failed her." That last part hit Tessa like a punch. She glanced at Marley, who stared at the floor. "I want her to stay here," Tessa said suddenly. The words surprised even her. Angela didn't react. That's not a simple process. There's paperwork, home inspections, background checks, and court reviews. You relinquished all parental rights 10 years ago. You're legally a stranger. Tessa swallowed. I don't want to be. Marley finally spoke. You don't have to do anything. I'll go if I have to. Angela looked between them, her face unreadable. Why don't I give you both a few minutes, she said, walking into the kitchen to make a phone call. Tessa sat on the couch beside Marley, who wouldn't meet her eyes. Did you know someone would come looking for you? Tessa asked. Eventually, Marley murmured. But I didn't think you'd let them take me. I didn't know they could, Tessa whispered. I thought maybe you showing up meant something, that we could try. Marley's jaw tightened. People say that, and then they send me back. Tessa reached out, her hand hovering over the girl's shoulder before she let it drop. I'm not people. I don't know what I am yet. But I want to find out. Marley didn't speak, but her chin trembled slightly. I know I gave you up, Tessa continued. I know that makes me the last person you should trust, but I was drowning back then, and I thought letting go meant saving you. It didn't, Marley said flatly. I wasn't saved. The silence that followed was thick, almost unbearable. Tessa could feel her chest collapse inward. Before she could reply, Angela re-entered the room. I've spoken with my supervisor. Here's what we can do. Marley can stay for 72 hours under an emergency kinship placement, pending further evaluation. You'll need to complete paperwork today. A social worker will come inspect the home tomorrow, and I'll need references. Tessa nodded before Angela even finished. Done. Whatever it takes. Marley, are you comfortable staying here for now? Angela asked gently. Marley shrugged. It's better than before. That wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. Angela handed over a small stack of forms and gave Tessa a deadline. We'll be in touch tomorrow morning, she said, and with that she turned and left. The door clicked shut behind her. Tessa sat back, staring at the ceiling. Marley sank deeper into the couch. So, Tessa said after a long pause, what do you like on your pizza? Marley blinked at her. What? I figure if you're going to stay here, we might as well eat something. I haven't cooked a full dinner since the Obama administration. Marley let out a small, unexpected laugh, the first sound of levity between them. Cheese and mushrooms. God help me, Tessa said, already reaching for the phone. I'm raising a mushroom person. And for the first time since that knock on the door, the house didn't feel like a stranger's. The forms sat on the kitchen counter like little bombs waiting to go off. Each line asked questions Tessa hadn't prepared to answer. Occupation, monthly income, emergency contacts, relationship to the child. That last one stopped her cold. There wasn't a checkbox for birth mother who gave up rights and now wants a second chance. After Marley had gone to bed, after they'd eaten half a pizza and watched a cartoon in almost complete silence, Tessa stared at the paperwork long into the night. She filled in her name, her job at the clinic, her apartment lease details. But when it came to the relationship line, she just wrote, Tessa Jameson, biological mother, hoping for more. She wasn't sure if that would make them laugh or call her in for questioning. The next morning she woke before the alarm and started cleaning with a frenzy she hadn't felt in years. She scrubbed baseboards, she folded laundry, she actually matched socks. When Marley emerged around 7, dressed in the same jeans and hoodie, Tessa met her with a quiet nod and a plate of toast. You sleep okay? She asked. Marley gave a half shrug. Better than most places. That response made Tessa both sad and grateful. They ate in silence. Then Marley hesitated with her last bite and said, "You don't have to try so hard." Tessa looked up. "What do you mean?" "Cleaning, cooking, smiling when you're nervous. I've lived in enough homes to know what it looks like when people try to impress social workers." Tessa felt her cheeks go hot. "I'm not just doing it for them." Marley gave her a long, unreadable look. "Okay." At 10:02 a.m., the doorbell rang again, and Tessa's heart climbed into her throat. The woman who entered was younger than Angela had been, mid-30s maybe, with sharp eyes and a calm voice. "Hi, I'm Stephanie Carter, case manager for CWS. I'll be handling your home assessment." She walked in with a clipboard and the kind of gentle authority that made people straighten their backs. Marley sat on the couch without being told. Stephanie looked around the apartment, checking window locks, smoke detectors, food in the fridge, toiletries in the bathroom. Then she asked to see Marley's sleeping space. Tessa led her down the hall, nervous energy trailing behind her like static. The guest room had been cleaned, a new pillowcase added, a nightlight plugged in. Marley had lined her few belongings on the windowsill, some books, a drawing, a cracked charm bracelet. Stephanie nodded approvingly. "This is a good start," she said. "We'll need to run a background check, of course, and I'll need a brief interview with you both." They sat around the dining table, Marley between them like the thread holding two fragile pieces together. "Marley," Stephanie said, "how do you feel here so far?" Marley looked down at her chipped fingernails. "It's quiet. She doesn't yell. She doesn't touch my stuff." "Has she made you feel safe?" Marley nodded. "Yes." Stephanie looked at Tessa. "Why now?" Tessa took a deep breath. "I didn't ask for this. But when she showed up, I realized I never stopped wondering. I made a choice back then that I thought was best for her. I didn't know how much I'd regret it until the moment she said my name." Stephanie wrote something down. "What changed for you?" "I stopped pretending it didn't happen, that she didn't exist. And now I want to earn whatever role she's willing to let me play, whether it's mother, aunt, or just someone she knows she can trust." There was a long pause. Then Stephanie closed her folder and smiled. "I'll file a temporary placement recommendation today. You'll be reviewed for longer-term guardianship in a few weeks." Tessa exhaled for what felt like the first time in 2 days. Marley just watched her silently, as if waiting to see what she'd do next. When Stephanie left, Tessa slumped against the wall. "That could have gone worse," she muttered. Marley stood awkwardly for a moment, then said, "You did okay?" Tessa laughed softly. "You think? Better than most." That was Marley's version of a compliment. Tessa would take it. "I was thinking," Tessa said, "if you're going to stay here a while, we could get you some clothes, something you like." Marley shrugged. "Okay, can I pick the store?" "As long as it's not the kind with a DJ and glitter walls." "No promises." At the thrift store 2 blocks away, Marley surprised her. She picked practical jeans, a yellow backpack, and a soft purple hoodie. She didn't ask for anything flashy, but at the checkout, she paused and added one last item, a small heart-shaped photo frame. "You have a picture of me as a baby?" she asked. Tessa swallowed. "Number. But I want to take one now." Marley didn't smile, but she nodded slowly. "Okay, but no filters." "Deal." They walked home with a bag of second chances and the quiet, fluttering hope that maybe, just maybe, this could become something real. The question came casually, too casually for the weight it carried. It was Saturday morning, and Marley was helping Tessa fold laundry on the living room floor. A comedy show played low in the background, the scent of cinnamon toast still hanging in the air. Marley held up a blue sweater and asked, "Was my dad nice?" Tessa froze mid-fold. Her hands caught in a t-shirt she suddenly didn't know how to finish folding. Her heart slammed once, hard. She looked at Marley, who wasn't smiling but wasn't guarded either. Just curious, like a kid asking about the weather. "Why do you want to know?" Tessa said quietly. Marley shrugged. "People talk about their dads all the time at school. I just want to know if mine was good." Tessa sat back against the couch. Her eyes burned. "I haven't said his name in years." "You don't have to," Marley said. "It's okay." But that was the thing. It wasn't okay. It had never been. His name was Chris. We met in college. He was smart. Funny in this really dry way that made you feel clever for getting the joke. She stopped, her throat tightening. "But when I got pregnant, he panicked. Said he wasn't ready to be a dad. Said I should take care of it." Marley didn't flinch. She waited. "I couldn't do that," Tessa went on, "so I told him I'd do it alone." And he disappeared. No calls, no money, no visits. I heard he moved out of state. "Do you hate him?" Marley asked. Tessa let out a breath. "I did, for a long time, but hating him didn't help me get through the nights, or the job shifts, or the decision I had to make. So I let go." Marley was quiet. Then she said, "Do you think he'd recognize me?" "I don't know. Would you ever want me to meet him?" Tessa shook her head. "Only if you wanted to. Only if it was safe. But you don't need him to know who you are." Marley nodded slowly, folding a pair of socks with care. "Do I look like him?" "Sometimes, around the eyes. But you have my chin and my stubbornness." That earned the faintest smile. They didn't talk about it again that day. But something shifted in the air, like a curtain drawn back, a light let in. That afternoon, they walked to the library. Tessa wanted Marley to see something that wasn't her apartment, wasn't the school, wasn't the backseat of a caseworker's car. Marley checked out 3 books, one about astronomy, one about coding, and one old dog-eared copy of Anne of Green Gables. "You like science?" Tessa asked as they left. "Sometimes. It's quiet, predictable." "And coding. You can build things from nothing. It feels powerful." "And Anne? She's weird. People think she talks too much, but she always finds her place." Tessa smiled. "Sounds familiar." When they got home, Marley disappeared into her room with her stack. Tessa curled up on the couch and stared at the ceiling. She had never imagined this life. Not once. Not in the years she spent avoiding every baby aisle, every children's movie, every question on doctor intake forms that asked, "Number of children." She used to write 0 with conviction. Now she didn't know what number to write at all. That evening, after dinner and dishes and a shared bowl of popcorn, Tessa found Marley sitting at the table with a notebook open. "What are you working on?" "A timeline," Marley said. "For school?" "For me." Tessa walked over and looked. On the page was a line with dates and scribbled phrases. "Born, 2014. Foster home 1. Moved, foster home 2. School change, foster home 3. The line stretched. Then, January 2025, found her. Tessa felt her throat close. "That's me?" Marley nodded. "You're a point on the line now." Tessa sat beside her. "Can I be more than a point?" "If you stay," Marley said, not cruelly, just honestly. "If you don't quit." "I'm not planning to." "Good. Because if you do, I have to start the timeline over again. And I'm tired of starting over." Tessa wanted to reach out, to hug her, to fix all of it. But she knew she couldn't. Not all at once. So instead she said, "Why don't we make a new timeline? One with firsts, like first pizza night, first trip to the library, first time folding socks together while arguing about mushrooms." Marley snorted. I didn't argue. You did. Let the record show the child is a mushroom sympathizer. Marley smiled without showing teeth. Okay, we can make that timeline too. And together, under the glow of a cheap lamp and a half-used pen, they started something new. Not a replacement, not a repair, but a beginning they hadn't planned for. A timeline neither of them had expected. One they could write together. On Monday morning, the world caught up with them. Tessa stood in front of her closet, staring at 2 wrinkled blouses like they held the power to fix what she was dreading. Returning to work after a surprise 4-day absence, with no explanation other than family emergency. Marley sat at the kitchen table, dressed in her new hoodie, calmly eating cereal as if she'd lived there her whole life. Tessa finally chose the dark green blouse. Professional, but not desperate. She braided her hair like she used to before early shifts and turned to Marley. You sure you're okay walking to school alone? I walked farther to find you, Marley replied without looking up. It wasn't a jab, just a fact. Tessa swallowed and nodded. Okay, I'll be back by 5. Call me if anything. I'll be fine. But when Tessa reached the door, Marley added, You're doing okay too. That stopped her. She looked back and saw Marley give her a tiny nod, a kind of blessing. Tessa walked out the door with her chest tight and a strange sense of being seen. The clinic lobby smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Sandra, the front desk nurse, raised an eyebrow as Tessa walked in. Hey, Lazarus, she said. Back from the dead? Something like that. You okay? Working on it. Well, your 9 a.m. is already coughing on the door handle, so welcome back. The day passed in a blur of fevers, paperwork, and worried parents. But in every quiet moment, Tessa's mind drifted back to Marley. What book she was reading, what she said at lunch, whether anyone teased her. At noon, she checked her phone. No messages. Relief and guilt tangled together. During her break, she stepped outside and called the school office. I'm just checking in. I'm Marley's... She hesitated. Guardian. Temporarily. The secretary responded kindly. She's doing great. Very polite. Her teacher said she volunteered to read aloud today. Tessa smiled. Thank you. But the smile faded when she returned to the break room. Sandra sat at the table with her arms crossed. You didn't tell anyone you had a kid, she said. Tessa blinked. I didn't. Until last week, I didn't have one. You adopted? Not exactly. She's mine. From before. She found me. Sandra blinked slowly. Wait, like your biological daughter? Tessa nodded. Long story. And she just showed up? With a file folder and a name I hadn't said in 10 years. Sandra leaned back. That's wild. Are you okay with it? Tessa looked down at her coffee. I'm not sure, but I think she is. And that's helping. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You don't have to explain anything to anyone. Just know, if you need backup, I got you. Tessa didn't realize how badly she needed those words until they landed. Thank you. Besides, Sandra added, smirking, if she's anything like you, I already feel bad for her teachers. When Tessa got home, Marley was on the couch, sketching in her notebook. Hey, Tessa said, how was school? Someone said I look like you. Is that good or bad? I said it was temporary. Tessa laughed and dropped her bag. You hungry? Always. They ordered Thai food, and while they ate noodles on the floor, Marley asked, Do I have a middle name? Tessa froze, then smiled. I never gave you one. They asked me at the hospital, and I couldn't think of anything that felt right, so I left it blank. Marley tilted her head. Can I pick one? Yeah, Tessa said, surprised. Of course. What would you have picked if you'd kept me? Tessa blinked. Hope, maybe? Or Claire. Something soft. Something I didn't feel like I deserved. Marley scribbled something in her notebook. I'll think about it. Later that evening, Marley brought out her school folder. We have to make a family tree. For class. It's due Friday. Tessa stared at the blank branches. Want me to help? Only if you want to. Together they filled in names they knew. Tessa's parents, aunts and uncles, a blank for Marley's father. You can leave it empty, Tessa said gently. You don't owe anyone that story. Marley nodded and wrote unknown in tiny letters. Then she drew a new branch. Not on the top or bottom, but beside hers. She wrote, Tessa, still learning? Tessa felt something break and mend inside her at the same time. That's fair, she whispered. That's more than fair. When Marley went to bed that night, she left the family tree on the table. Tessa looked at it for a long time, tracing her name, the branches, the honesty in that one phrase, still learning. And for the first time in a long, long time, she let herself believe that maybe she wasn't failing, just beginning again. It started with a cough. Just a little one, half swallowed between bites of cereal, nothing serious. Tessa barely noticed as she rushed to pack Marley's lunch and double-check the forms for her custody hearing next week. But by noon, the school nurse was calling. Hi, this is Ms. Harper from Jefferson Elementary. Marley's running a fever of 102 and says her head hurts. She asked us not to call you, said you'd be busy. But I thought you should know. Tessa was already grabbing her keys before the nurse finished speaking. The drive felt longer than it should have, the lights too slow, the minutes too loud in her head. She didn't remember parking. Just walking through the front office and seeing Marley sitting on a little vinyl bench, her cheeks flushed and her arms crossed over her stomach like she was trying to hold herself together. Hey, sweetheart, Tessa said gently, crouching beside her. Why didn't you want them to call me? Marley didn't meet her eyes. You missed work last week, and Sandra said you needed the hours. You heard that? Marley gave a tiny shrug. I hear everything. Tessa reached for her hand and felt the heat immediately. Let's go home. At home, Marley curled under the blanket on the couch without protest. That alone worried Tessa. The girl who usually had opinions about toast texture and pillow firmness now just nodded when asked if she wanted water. Tessa made soup, took her temperature again, and called the pediatric clinic. It's likely viral, the nurse said. Fluids, rest, watch for worsening symptoms. But when she hung up, Tessa didn't feel better. Watching Marley sleep was like watching a candle flicker in a drafty room. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile. Around 2 a.m., the cough worsened. Marley sat upright, gasping, her face damp with sweat. It hurts, she whispered, pressing her hand to her ribs. It really hurts. Tessa didn't hesitate. She wrapped her in a blanket and rushed to the ER, one hand on the steering wheel, the other gripping Marley's hand like it could anchor them both. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights were too bright, and the wait felt endless. A nurse checked her vitals. A doctor listened to her lungs. Then came blood work, a chest X-ray, and finally a diagnosis: pneumonia. It's early, the doctor said. We'll start antibiotics and fluids. She's a tough kid. Tessa nodded, but inside something cracked. As Marley dozed in the hospital bed, hooked to an IV, Tessa sat in the chair beside her and stared at the thin white band around her wrist. Marley Jameson, age 10. Her last name. Her child. She didn't need the court papers to know that anymore. She reached into her purse and pulled out the tiny photo they'd taken last week, still tucked inside her wallet. Marley had been smiling. Barely. but it was a start. Tessa thought about all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep after the adoption, all the years she'd told herself it was for the best. And yet, here they were, bound not by legal rights, but by something stronger. Marley stirred and whispered, "I'm sorry." "For what?" Tessa leaned closer. "For costing you money, and sleep, and work." Tessa shook her head and took her hand. "You're not a cost, Marley. You're a reason. A really, really good reason." Marley didn't say anything. She just squeezed her hand back. The nurse brought in a new blanket, and Tessa tucked it gently around her, brushing damp curls from her forehead. Marley was asleep again within minutes. That night, Tessa didn't leave the hospital. She sat in the recliner beside the bed and watched the monitor beep a slow, steady rhythm, like a promise that this time she would stay. In the morning, Stephanie from CWS showed up unannounced. She didn't look angry, just concerned. "I saw the hospital report come through. How's she doing?" "Better now," Tessa said, "but it was bad last night." Stephanie sat beside her. "You handled it like a parent." "I am a parent." "Yes," Stephanie said softly. "You are. The hearing's in 6 days. Are you ready?" "More than I thought I'd be." Stephanie handed her a small folder. "Bring this with you. Final forms, character references, proof of residency. And Tessa, don't be afraid to speak from the heart. Judges don't just want paperwork. They want to see what's real." Tessa looked down at the sleeping girl, her cheeks pale but peaceful. "It doesn't get more real than this." Stephanie smiled and stood to leave. "You're doing good, Tessa. Better than most." That phrase, "better than most," echoed in her mind long after Stephanie left. Marley stirred an hour later, blinked slowly, and whispered, "You stayed." Tessa leaned in, brushing a hand across her forehead. "Of course I did." Marley's eyes fluttered shut again, and her lips moved just enough to murmur, "You didn't last time." Tessa swallowed the lump in her throat and whispered, "I know. But I will this time. I promise." And in the sterile quiet of the hospital room, with the monitors beeping and the storm of the past finally settling, the girl who had once been given away held her mother's hand like it had never let go. Marley was discharged 2 days later with a bottle of antibiotics, a warning to rest, and a thin hospital discharge summary that Tessa clutched like a lifeline. She bundled Marley into the car with extra blankets and a full thermos of warm water. The drive home was quiet, the kind of quiet that meant both of them were thinking more than they could say. Tessa kept glancing at her in the rear-view mirror, not out of worry this time, but out of disbelief that this child, this fiercely guarded, painfully brave child, was now hers in all the ways that mattered. The apartment smelled like lemon cleaner and cinnamon when they stepped in, still warm from the sun through the living room window. Marley sat down slowly on the couch, curled into her blanket, and looked around like she was checking to see if anything had changed. "You want toast?" Tessa asked gently. "With honey?" Marley nodded. That small nod felt like more than permission. It felt like belonging. As Tessa stood buttering the toast, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. "Hello? Miss Jameson? This is Judge Langley's office. I'm calling to confirm that your custody hearing is still scheduled for Thursday morning at 9 a.m. Tessa blinked. "Yes, of course. Thank you." She hung up and leaned on the counter for a moment. Thursday. The word thudded in her chest like a second heartbeat. "What was that?" Marley called from the couch. "The court. They're finalizing our hearing date." Marley looked down. "So they'll decide if I stay or go?" "They'll decide if it's legal," Tessa said carefully. "But whether you stay, that's up to us, you and me." Marley was quiet for a while. Then she whispered, "I want to stay." Tessa had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep her voice steady. "Then we fight for that." That night, as she helped Marley into bed and refilled the humidifier, Marley suddenly asked, "What happens if the judge says no?" Tessa paused, her hand on the plug. "Then we try again. We appeal. We file more papers. I won't stop trying, Marley. I won't disappear." Marley looked up at her with wide, searching eyes. "Even if I mess up? Or get sick again? Even then? Even if I get mad and say I hate you?" Tessa smiled. "Especially then." And just as she stood to leave, Marley whispered something so soft, Tessa almost missed it. "Okay, Mom?" Tessa turned slowly. Marley's face was half buried in the pillow, her eyes shut, her breath already deepening with sleep. But the word lingered in the air like a spark catching fire. "Mom." She didn't dare say anything back, afraid to break the moment. Instead, she closed the door gently and stood in the hallway, her back pressed to the wall, her chest rising and falling like she'd just run a mile uphill. The next morning, Marley was brighter. Her cough had loosened, her color returning. Over breakfast, she asked if she could go back to school the next day, and Tessa promised to ask the doctor. They sat side by side at the kitchen table, working on a jigsaw puzzle they'd started the week before. The one with the hot air balloons and sunset sky. Marley had insisted on starting from the top, not the edges, which annoyed Tessa at first, but now made a strange kind of sense. As they worked, Marley said, "Do you think the judge will ask me questions?" "Maybe," Tessa replied. "Are you scared?" "I just want to tell the truth." "What would you say?" Marley picked up a piece and clicked it into place. "That you don't try to be perfect, but you stay. That's more than most." Tessa turned to her slowly. "You keep saying that. More than most. Where did you hear it?" "Mrs. Hightower, my second foster mom. She said it once about her sister, who always showed up late but always came anyway. She said, 'You don't need people to be perfect. You just need them to come back.'" Tessa nodded, swallowing the ache in her chest. "That's smart." "Yeah. She wasn't always nice, but she said good things sometimes." When Marley returned to her puzzle, Tessa looked at her for a long moment. This child with too many histories and not enough softness, who somehow still had room for hope. Later that afternoon, Marley brought her a folded sheet of paper. "It's for the judge," she said, "in case I get nervous." Tessa opened it and read slowly. It was written in Marley's careful, slanted handwriting. "I know she gave me up. But now she holds on. I know she didn't raise me. But she remembers my name. I know she's learning. But she's not leaving." Tessa couldn't speak. She reached out and pulled Marley into her arms. And for the first time, Marley didn't flinch. She leaned in and let herself be held. The courtroom was smaller than Tessa imagined. No towering judge's bench or echoing walls like in the movies, just a modest wood-paneled room with plastic chairs, humming overhead lights, and a judge who looked more like someone's tired grandfather than the man who would decide whether she could keep her daughter. Marley sat beside her, wearing the purple hoodie they'd bought together and holding her school folder like it was armor. Tessa had braided her hair that morning with trembling fingers, trying to make it neat, trying to make it all feel steady. Stephanie sat on Tessa's other side, a calm presence in a gray blazer, occasionally checking her watch and smiling gently at Marley, who hadn't spoken since they left the apartment. When the clerk called their names, Tessa's legs felt like water. They stood together, mother and daughter, and walked to the front. The judge adjusted his glasses, glanced at the file in front of him, and looked up. "Miss Jameson, I've reviewed your petition for temporary guardianship with intent to adopt. You were the biological parent who relinquished rights 10 years ago, correct? Yes, Your Honor. And you are now seeking custody after the minor child found her way to you following the death of her foster guardian? Yes. That's an unusual path. I know, she said quietly. But it's ours. The judge's eyes softened slightly. I see that the Child Welfare Agency has completed a home study and background check. No flags. Stephanie leaned forward. Your Honor, I can confirm that Ms. Jameson's home is stable, her employment consistent, and the child has expressed a clear desire to remain with her. The judge nodded. Marley, would you like to speak for yourself? Marley looked up. Her voice was small but clear. I just want to stop moving. I want to stay where someone remembers how I take my tea and what book I'm reading and doesn't forget my name. Tessa's heart cracked. Stephanie smiled. The judge leaned back and laced his fingers. That's a good reason. A short silence followed as he flipped through the file, then looked at Tessa. Why now? He asked. You had 10 years. Tessa took a breath. Because I was scared back then. Poor. Alone. I thought giving her up would give her a better chance. And I never stopped thinking about her. But I thought she was safe. When she showed up at my door, I realized she hadn't had safety. Just silence. And I couldn't let her disappear again. The judge closed the file slowly. Sometimes, he said, life brings things full circle, even when we don't deserve it. Tessa couldn't tell if he meant that kindly or as a warning. But then he turned to Stephanie. Any objections to granting emergency guardianship pending final review? None, Your Honor. Then I'm approving the request, he said, signing with a sharp stroke. Ms. Jameson, you are now the legal guardian of Marley Jameson. We'll set a review date in 90 days for full adoption consideration. Until then, do your best. Both of you. Tessa's breath hitched. Marley looked up at her, and this time, when their eyes met, there was no distance between them. The judge stood and left through the side door. It was over. Or maybe it was just beginning. In the hallway outside, Marley finally let out a long breath. Does this mean I stay? Tessa knelt down. It means no one can take you from me, not anymore. Marley didn't smile, but she stepped forward and wrapped her arms tightly around Tessa's waist. It was the first time she'd initiated a hug. Tessa held her back, fierce and quiet. Stephanie handed them the paperwork. You both did great, she said. Go celebrate. Do something silly. We might eat cupcakes until we're sick, Tessa said. Or adopt a cat, Marley added. A weird one with one eye and a limp. Perfect, Stephanie laughed. I'll check in soon. They walked out of the courthouse into bright afternoon light. Tessa blinked at the sun, the weight of 10 years lifting off her shoulders like fog. Marley held her hand. Not tightly, not desperately, but like it was something she could finally trust. You okay? Tessa asked. I think so, Marley said. Are you? Not even close, but in a good way? Marley looked thoughtful. Can I still call you Tessa sometimes? You can call me whatever feels right. Even Mushroom Lady? You're pushing it. Marley laughed. Tessa ruffled her hair. Let's go find that cat. And cupcakes, Marley added. Obviously. They walked down the courthouse steps with no plan, no script, just a new name on a file, and a promise in their hearts. To build something neither of them had before. A family that chose each other twice. It rained the following Saturday, one of those soft, steady drizzles that makes everything quieter. Marley sat on the floor of her new bedroom, surrounded by open boxes. Not the kind stuffed with old belongings. She hadn't come with much. But ones they'd filled together since the court date. a ceramic cat lamp from a yard sale, a pile of used chapter books, and a second-hand beanbag chair in a ridiculous orange fabric that she insisted was perfectly hideous. Tessa stood in the doorway holding a roll of wall-safe tape. "You sure you want to hang that there?" she asked, pointing at Marley's sketch of their apartment front door with "Home" scrawled under it. Marley nodded. "It's the first thing I saw when you opened it." Tessa smiled. "All right, then." She handed her the tape and sat cross-legged on the bed, watching as Marley carefully pressed the drawing onto the wall above her desk. The word "home" stayed, question mark and all. "You know," Marley said softly, "I think the question mark is still fair, but it's smaller now." Tessa blinked back the sting in her eyes. "That's good. We're not in a race." Marley nodded and returned to unpacking. They spent the afternoon building a bookshelf. Well, Tessa built it, badly, while Marley read the instructions and offered advice in the form of sarcastic commentary. By the time they got the last screw in, the shelf leaned slightly to the left. "Perfect," Marley said. "It matches us." At dinner, they cooked together for the first time. Real cooking, not just toast or reheating soup. Tessa handed her a knife and a pile of carrots, then paused. "Have you done this before?" "Once," Marley said. "It didn't go well." "That's okay. Neither did my last 12 years. Marley grinned and started chopping with careful determination. They made pasta with vegetables and way too much garlic. Afterward, Tessa watched Marley dry dishes like she had 100 times before, like she belonged in that kitchen more than any appliance. Then Marley said, "I told my teacher I wanted to change my name." Tessa turned slowly. "You did?" "Yeah, I told her I want to keep Marley, but I want your last name, officially." Tessa's heart dropped into her stomach in the best possible way. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. "I know, but I want to. You stayed. You showed up. That should count for something." Tessa leaned against the counter, hands wet, eyes full. "It counts for everything." That night, before bed, Marley came out of her room holding the picture frame Tessa had given her, the one they bought at the thrift store, the one meant for a baby photo she never had. "Can we take one now?" she asked. "Like a real one? With both of us?" Tessa smiled. "Right now? In pajamas?" "Yeah, especially in pajamas." They set up Tessa's phone on a stack of books and stood side by side in the living room, the rain tapping gently on the windows. Marley reached up and wrapped her arm around Tessa's waist without being asked. Tessa rested her chin lightly on Marley's head. The timer flashed, and the photo snapped. When they looked at it afterward, Marley said, "Okay, I look weird." "You look perfect." "Number you do, I just look like I belong to someone." Tessa kissed the top of her head. "You do." Later, as they sat on the couch under a blanket watching a movie neither of them cared about, Marley whispered, "You know what I want for my birthday?" "Tell me." "A room that doesn't feel borrowed." Tessa didn't respond right away. Then she whispered, "I've been saving. There's this 2-bedroom down the hall. It has a real window seat and a tiny balcony that's probably not up to code." "Yeah?" "Yeah. We can go see it next week, if we want." "We want," Marley said. "We definitely want." The movie droned on in the background, but neither of them watched. They just sat in the quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, just full of things not needing to be said. That night, as Marley climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin, she paused. "Hey, Mom?" "Yeah?" "You don't have to do everything right. Just don't leave, okay?" Tessa stepped closer and tucked the blanket around her. "I won't, not ever again." Marley didn't answer. She just closed her eyes and let herself drift, the kind of sleep that only comes when a storm has finally passed. And outside, as the rain slowed to a hush and the night deepened, the apartment stood still, holding them both like it finally knew exactly who it belonged to. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on General Common Tales. If a little girl showed up at your door with your name on a legal file, would you let her in?